And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Mastering Positive Assertiveness. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is an executive leadership coach, Dr. Rochelle Hoekstra Anderson. Rochelle, you now have the floor.
Well, good day to all of you. It is absolutely a joy and a privilege to be able to present Mastering Positive Assertiveness to you. And my name is Dr. Rochelle Hoekstra Anderson, as already introduced, and as a life transformation and leadership coach, clinical psychologist, and a facilitator for New Horizons, I absolutely love coaching professionals to move forward with confidence, purpose, and peace. And I'm super excited to be able to share this content with you today because assertiveness skills are absolutely essential to creating your best life. And when you learn to skillfully use your voice and express your desires, your needs, and your wants respectfully, you're more likely to get the results that create for more harmony, joy, and peace in all facets of your life. So if you're like me, you love harmony, joy, and peace. We could all use more of that. So this is just a little bit about some of my background. As I said before, I'm passionate about equipping and empowering people to their best lives possible. So today, what you're going to be learning about is what assertiveness is all about and how to recognize the links of communication to assertiveness, and of course, hopefully learning some strategies and tactics that will enable you to deal a little bit more effectively with some difficult situations or people you may encounter either in your personal life or in the work environment. So to kick things off, I'm going to present to you a fictitious but not really an uncommon scenario to get you thinking how you personally might respond if you were in this situation. So allow me to introduce you to Carol. Carol, who works with George. And George has a habit of discounting her contributions to their team. Carol's patience is really beginning to wear thin with George because a week ago he had undermined her yet again, this time in front of other colleagues during their weekly team meeting. So she decided after that it was time to tell him how it's making her feel. And just as she was about to approach him, she lost her nerve. Then, guess what? George did it again yesterday. And once again, Carol was feeling humiliated and frustrated at how he was just not able to see the effect these comments were having on her. Unfortunately, she still couldn't bring herself to speak to him directly about it. She was feeling very frustrated with herself, and she was beginning to get very resentful toward him, but also resigned that this is the way it is. So let me bring this to you. How about you? Type in the word yes in the comment section if you've ever had a situation similar to Carol's, if you've ever encountered a coworker or a supervisor or even someone in your personal life where you were feeling disrespected or you desperately wanted to say something, but then you just held back and let it slide. Anybody? Mayanna, do we have anyone who's...
Oh, we have so many resounding yeses out there.
Oh, yes, we've all been there, me included. Yep, isn't it frustrating? And there's kind of this helpless feeling that comes along with that too. And this is what this seminar, this webinar is really all about, is first of all, normalizing this. We all struggle with this from time to time. Even the most assertive of us at times can resort to a passive style depending on the person. So today you're going to learn how to deal with these kinds of situations. So I'm going to be using this Carol George scenario throughout the presentation to really help illustrate some of the key concepts and see the strategies in action to help Carol develop a more productive communication style. So let's use the description of assertiveness to discover if she's being assertive with George. So looking at the first point, Was she confident and direct in dealing with George? Well, I think this is pretty obvious. She's not dealing with him directly. So it implies there's a lack of confidence there. Did she demonstrate fairness and equality, showing a positive sense of respect for herself and George? Well, her silence might show respect toward him, but certainly she's not demonstrating it for herself, and it is not fair or equal to herself, for herself. Did she use direct communication of her needs, wants, and opinions without punishing, threatening, or putting down George? Well, she certainly wasn't showing any signs of the aggression of punishing and threatening or putting him down, but again, no direct communication. Did she stand up for her rights without violating the rights of George? Or was she overly fearful in the process? Again, not standing up for herself in this situation, and we don't really know how she's feeling inside at the time, but I would guess there's a little bit of fear going on. So this seems to be a pretty clear-cut case that Carol could really use some guidance on using more assertive behavior and communication with George. Now, I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to pretend that you are in Carol's shoes for the remainder of this presentation, because I'd like to treat this like a coaching situation, and maybe you can just call this your alter ego, Carol. And really what I want to do is help you to think through this kind of a scenario on how to become more assertive in your communication. So let's look first of all at the 4 primary styles of communication, and I'm sure you've all have heard these terms before, but we're gonna unpack them a little bit in just a moment. So the 4 styles are passive aggressive, and assertive. And we all have communication styles that utilize any of those 4 styles depending on the situation we find ourselves in. But we all have a primary style. And in other words, it's a style that tends to come out when it's needed most in terms of dealing with difficulties or when we need to speak up. So your primary style is really going to be a combination of learned behavior and how your brain is wired, which is certainly based on experiences you've had. So in this presentation, I want you to think about your own unique style. And this is something we go into much more depth in our full training seminar. In fact, we have an assessment that will help you look at that in a more detailed manner. But even today, you can learn to communicate with greater effectiveness. And when you do so, you're going to find you're better meeting your needs and desires while also respecting those of other people. So let's take a look at your response to George and see what communication pattern you demonstrate. Now remember, I'm talking to your alter ego, Carol. Okay, so the passive approach. This is when you avoid expressing your opinions or feelings. You're not speaking up for yourself, but instead you're just letting that person have their own way while you're not expressing what you want or need. And this is oftentimes pretty obvious, and even in terms of just your body language. Slumping, not looking people in the eye, maybe speaking quietly or saying, gee, I'm sorry, I mean, I don't mean to, we come across very insecure. The opposite approach is the aggressive style. This is where you strongly express your desires, and here's the key, without taking the other person's feelings, needs, or wants into consideration. So using criticism or blaming is aggressive behavior. And so is any communication where you're trying to intimidate or frighten or make someone feel guilt. And often the body language even appears threatening, where the stance is almost kind of like an attack mode. Eye contact can be a stare or a glare with a frown on the face. And then we have the combination approach, the passive aggressive person. This approach is a way of communicating your needs, usually in a roundabout way. You may use sarcasm or humor. Maybe you make a joke or drop a hint about what you want. Or even on the surface, you appear very passive, but behind the scenes, your aggressiveness is going to come out in words and things you're doing. And then, of course, the style we're all here to get better at, and that's the assertive approach, where you honestly express your thoughts and feelings. And you do so in a way that's really showing respect for that other person, what they feel and their wants and needs. This is generally a good-willed person demonstrating equality. So, Carol, I think you'd agree that this passive approach is describing the style you used with George, right? So I'm going to speak to you on this webinar. If you were to momentarily step out of the Carol ego, the alter ego, I want you to type in the communication style you personally identify with, that you use primarily in challenging situations. I'm curious to hear, how many of you see that passive is your primary way of dealing with things? So where you just don't speak up, or aggressive, where maybe you're defensive, or you're kind of in that blame mode, or the passive aggressive approach where maybe you don't say anything on the surface, but boy, you go back to your office and you're mumbling and grumbling, and maybe you're gossiping about what a jerk George is. Or do you find yourself being able to speak up directly and say, hey, George, when you do this, it makes me feel. So Mayanne, what kinds of behaviors are people struggling with, or communication styles, what are people mentioning?
A lot of people are saying passive aggressive. We have a few that say, depends on the situation, who they're talking to, passive or aggressive. So a lot of passive aggressive out there.
Yep. Well, thank you guys for being clear about recognizing that pattern. And I'm going to speak to that as well in just a little bit of why that pattern really is not in your own best interest. So let's go back to the Carol ego. Okay, so let's look at some ways to help you become more assertive in your communication with George. And I just want to say there are going to be not only short-term consequences for remaining passive or even passive aggressive, but there are long-term consequences, because in the short run, when you're not speaking up directly, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling irritated, you're feeling resentful towards George and maybe even yourself. And in the long run, when you're not speaking out what you really feel and doing this in a respectful manner, what it's doing to you on the inside is this actually making you more predisposed to feeling depressed, hopeless. It impacts your self-esteem. And some people get physically ill. So some of the disorders that I've seen in people is just hypertension and ulcers and high blood pressure and migraines. I mean, there's no end to the ways that stress can manifest itself physically. So that's what happens when we hold things in and we don't take care of them. And even though aggressive approach is a way of expressing feelings and getting it out, but it does it in a way that isn't really honoring, first of all, the other person, but surprisingly, you may be surprised to find that it's not honoring yourself either. So what I want to say to you is that you are worth taking care of. Now, while we don't have time to delve into all the dimensions of communication like we will in our full-length workshop, I really want to help you increase your awareness of what might be most impacting your communication style. And I'm going to tell you that most of the time it can be traced back to your thoughts. Your thoughts have been influenced by previous experiences you've had and some modeling you may have experienced, maybe through other authority figures in conflict, whether it be your parents or teachers or bosses or supervisors, those have all impacted what we think about in terms of how we communicate. So I'm going to ask you, Carol, to think about your thoughts. And I've got a series of questions that I want you to just think about as I go through them with you. So when George was being kind of a bully in the team meeting and was not, really acknowledging your thoughts, your contributions. What were you telling yourself as he was speaking? What were you telling yourself in terms of what you expected would happen if you spoke up? Were you afraid you were going to cause a scene, or you're afraid of what he might do? Do you believe your feelings are as important as his? Do you believe your contributions are just as valuable to the team as George's? What's really holding you back from saying something? In general, would you say your thoughts about yourself tend to weigh more on a positive side or more on the negative? How do you tend to talk to yourself, especially when you're not speaking up or when you make a mistake? What do you say to yourself? Are you more your best friend or your own worst enemy? Are you the type to pick apart your own flaws and focus on your weaknesses? Or are you valuing who you are and what you bring to the work environment? So really, I'm asking you to think about, do you tend to weigh more on the positive side or the negative side when you think about you and when you think about your right to speak up? Now, what makes this challenging is that thinking positively actually requires more effort than thinking negatively. Now, that may not be a surprise to you, because when you listen to those around us, and maybe even you listen to yourself speak, it's easier to complain, isn't it? It's easier to look for the faults versus finding the good, because as human beings, we're actually bent toward the negative. We have a negativity bias. So it's just easier for us to be negative. So if we're going to get more assertive, we have to become much more aware of not only our thinking and what kinds of thoughts we're having, but also our self-talk. Now, maybe you haven't really paid much attention to what you say to yourself day in, day out in various situations. So I'm going to recommend that this is a great place for you to start. Just simply pay attention to, what do you think? What are you thinking about you? What are you thinking about you in relation to the people around you and the circumstances that are happening to you? In fact, I'm going to suggest that even over the next week, Carol, that every day think about writing down thoughts you have around the events that are just happening. And don't plan on changing anything yet. Just start paying attention to it. And I believe that after a few days, if you just pay attention, what do I automatically think in reaction to things? You're going to start seeing a pattern. And that pattern is going to enable you to begin to see an opportunity to perhaps tweak your self-talk. Because self-talk is a powerful tool that will help you build your confidence. So let me give you some examples of some confidence-building language that actually is going to affirm your worth and value. Now, you see on the screen that self-talk is just the words that we're saying to ourselves. And we're using self-talk all day long. We're just not necessarily paying attention to it. So let me give you some phrases that in this situation with George in particular, or with difficult work environment scenarios, that you can say to yourself and that you can begin to practice. In fact, I encourage you to write down some of these statements, even on a sticky note, and put it somewhere where you practice seeing it and saying it out loud, because the more you see it, the more you say it, the more it becomes part of you. So things like, I'm proud of what I bring to my team. My feelings matter, and I'm learning to speak up for myself. Now that statement right there, my feelings matter and I am learning to speak up for myself, isn't a lie. It might feel like a lie if you say my feelings matter and I speak up for myself if you haven't been practicing that. But putting yourself in the learning mode says it's developing you. We all have seeds of assertiveness in us, but we just need to call them out. And we call them out when we start saying them over and over again. Here's another statement. When I use my voice, others respect me, and I respect myself. Here's another one. I positively impact my work environment when I share my opinion and beliefs. And that's true. You are having a positive impact on your environment every time you do share your opinions and beliefs. They do matter. See how this kind of language brings more positive and hopeful energy? And here's the thing. When you choose to think and speak in those ways internally, your mind is actually directing your brain. It's directing it to what to focus upon. And it adds energy. Because when we speak and think negatively, it's disempowering. It sucks the energy right out of us. Now, assertiveness is obviously expressed in what we say. And I've just been talking about self-talk, which, by the way, self-talk precedes a lot of times what comes out of your mouth. And it also directs what we do. And we all know that nonverbal communication, it is clearly what we're saying without our words, right? I mean, so it's how our posture is, what we're doing, our tone of voice. So we're going to flesh that out in just a moment. But here's the key thing that I want you to tune into, is your nonverbals are literally the single most powerful part of your communication. So it isn't just about getting words down, it's also paying attention to how you're expressing yourself. In fact, I was astounded to see this study out of UCLA that as much as 93% of our communication effectiveness really is our body language. It's those nonverbal cues. And guess what? If your words aren't matching your body language is going to win out every single time, because people are looking and they're paying attention to your expression and your posture. So all of those things, body language and some of the specific things that I'm going to be pointing out in the next slide, really helps enable people to get a sense of your self-respect. Now, let's just look at a few things that I want you to just start noticing when you listen to other people is their eye contact. So eye contact, maintaining it with the person you're speaking with, first of all, the more you're looking at them with just occasional looking away, the more confident you're going to appear. And your posture, just being relaxed. Avoid that being overly rigid or slouching. Put your shoulders back, head up in a comfortable, relaxed position. I don't know if you're a parent, but I've had to say to my daughters who slouch sometimes, when they were teenagers, I'd say, put your shoulders back, put your head up, look people in the eye. It helps you look like you're engaged, but it also gives confidence. And of course, avoiding excessive bodily movements, that fidgeting that we can do, or playing with our phones, or rustling papers. Making sure your facial expressions match your words. For example, smile when you're complimenting someone. If you're displeased with something, make sure your face matches this. I've had people smile when they're upset about something. That's confusing when our nonverbals don't match our message that we're sending across. And of course, tone of voice. It's that tone of voice. We all know when we're being spoken to in a way that we feel like we're being lectured at or condescending, that kind of thing. You want to pay attention to the quality of your voice, so your pitch and how loud you're speaking. You want to make sure people can hear you, but not shout. And, we all have had said to kids, inside voice, please. But, paying attention to just even how fast you're speaking, all those things really truly make a difference in how confident you're sounding when you're communicating. Now, I know when we're in challenging situations, anxiety can absolutely come up for us. And we can sometimes get a little bit sidetracked by how we're feeling, and it limits or it impacts our confidence level. So I'm going to ask you with George, are you feeling anxious when these situations are coming up? What are you sensing inside? Because the more anxious you are, and if you're not controlling that anxiety, the more difficult it is going to be for you to use your voice to come across confidently. So a real simple strategy you can use to combat anxiety in this situation with George or with anybody who's presenting kind of a difficult scenario for you is to just simply shift your focus to your breathing. Now, your breath is something that is with you at all times. And I'm going to tell you just in my work with people that a lot of times people are not aware of they're holding their own breath at times, especially when they get stressed or angry, or their breathing becomes really short and shallow. And when that happens, it's shutting down the brain's ability to access solutions because it becomes narrowly constricted. So what I'm going to tell you is something really simple. We need to be doing this all day long anyway, but especially in anxiety-provoking situations, is just simply turn your attention inward and notice your breath. And take a nice, slow, deep breath in. Inhale. And with each inhale, say to yourself something like, breathe in. And with each exhale, say, relax. So in that moment, you can just be quietly saying to yourself, breathe in, relax, breathe in, relax. And with each breath, bring in peace, access that inner peace and calm that is there in you somewhere. And as you exhale, just release the worry or release the anger. And using your breath and using cue words such as breathe, peace, relax, what you're doing is you're signaling to your brain to just calm down, which as you do that, you're going to speak with more confidence. Now, confidence is also tied to your sense of self-worth. And basically, your self-worth is how you would answer this question, who am I? What are some of the assumptions or beliefs you hold about yourself? Because those things are directly underneath how assertive, how direct you are in expressing your opinions, your needs, and your desires. And the healthier your sense of self-worth is, the more in charge you're going to feel in creating a life filled with fulfillment and meaning and joy. And the more you value you, well, it just gets easier to speak up. And of course, we delve more into this topic because this is so big, this is so huge in our ability to have a full life. And we talk about that more in the full-length seminar, but let me just say this, that the things I'm talking about, self-talk and helping yourself to remain calm in challenging situations and having a solid sense of self-worth, all of these things combine to a more assertive person. These are all learned skills. Assertiveness is learned, and it takes a lot of practice. So don't feel badly if you're not there yet, and don't feel like, hey, I just wasn't born with this. Really, nobody is. And if we were, I mean, I guess you could say kids are pretty confident until they're told not to be confident because we tell them to behave. And then maybe even stronger messages we've learned along the way that we were told not to use our voice. So there may be some relearning that we all need to do at certain times. But what I want you to know is the more comfortable you become speaking up for yourself, even in just everyday scenarios, like in the grocery store, if somebody is rude to you, the more natural it will be when you're faced with these challenging situations in the workplace where it is a little harder, or maybe with the people we love the most where it's hard to speak up. So here's my recommendation to you. Before I mention is to start paying attention to how you're thinking about yourself. I also just encourage you to start practicing assertive responses with people you're already comfortable with. And with our longer training, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to practice various assertiveness responses in challenging situations with difficult people, because let's just face it, it's hard sometimes knowing how to deal with difficult people. And so let's take a look at what our natural response is when we are faced with difficult people. So we may demonstrate those passive responses where we just simply want to avoid them. You see them coming down the hall, you duck into an office or the bathroom because it's like, I don't want to deal with that person. And you may find when you have difficult people in your daily life or that you have to encounter in the workplace, is that we tend to start really all we see on them is just what a jerk they are. We look at all their negative qualities and that we become like hyper focused and laser focused and all the ways they are just a pain for us. Or as many of us have identified, we tend to become rather passive aggressive. And I see that a lot where we're not speaking up, but boy, the first chance we can with our coworkers, we're saying, oh, did you see what they did? Or did you hear what they said? And we're cutting them down every chance we get, which does give us a kind of a release, which feels good in the moment. But I'm going to tell you, it really doesn't help you, because really what it's doing is taking away from the energy you need to actually deal with the situation more assertively. The more passive aggressive we are, and of course the more passive we are, it is truly draining us. And it's not enabling us to really create a positive solution. So Carol, let's go back to your situation with George, who you're finding is repeatedly undermining you in front of the team. Well, so what might be some new strategies you might try to assert yourself? Well, along with some of the things I've already mentioned to you, I'm going to encourage you, Carol, that maybe before you actually have a conversation with him, how about you find someone to role play with? Is there a coworker who you can trust, or maybe someone at home or a friend? Another idea is maybe you want to write out what exactly you want to say to him, so you're clear about the message you want to give him, so you're not flustered in that situation that you haven't thought through what you specifically want to say to him. So let me give you some ideas of what you might say to him or how you might handle these kinds of scenarios in the future. You might say something like, George, I'd really like to speak with you about how I feel around your comments that you're making about me in our team meetings. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. I'm giving you a sentence stem that you can employ in any scenario, such as, when you say, and then fill in the blank, what is that person saying? Then, I feel. So when you say this, I feel this. Or flip it around. I feel frustrated and hurt, George, when you discredit my work or you discount my contributions. So I feel when, or when you say I feel. That's just a real simple sentence stem. Now notice with this style, you're not really attacking George, you're just simply pointing out his behavior. You're connecting with how it's impacting you. And then you can follow up with a request. You could say something like, well, from here on, George, I would really feel respected if you would. Now, give him what you're looking for. Now, in ideal scenario, he's going to say, oh, gosh, I'm so sorry, Carol. I had no idea. I wasn't even aware. And you know what? A lot of times we need to give people the benefit of the doubt. And then, unfortunately, there are going to be times when George does not really respect your experience, even after you do assertively address it with him. And maybe he becomes defensive or downright confrontational in response. Well, I hate that when that happens, and it does happen. But let's talk about how you might approach that kind of a situation. Well, I'm going to just say to you, breathe, first of all, because when emotions get involved, remember, our brains will kind of shut down, and it's kind of our fight and flight response. We might, become aggressive back, or we might just freeze. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is just take a nice, slow, deep breath, look him in the eye, and just say, George, I really want to understand your point of view. So this is what we call active listening. Active listening is where you're going to really, as much as you don't want to because you just want to fight back and you want to attack or you want to just, speak, if you can slow yourself down and just again, breathe and say, so help me understand your point of view. So you might just say, okay, so what I hear you saying, George, and then, say some of his words back to him. And then say, am I right? Is that what you're saying? Because, really what you're trying to get him to see is that you really are being respectful and trying to understand his point of view. And you're going to ask some more questions to draw more out of him to get more clarity. So what you're doing in this case is you are working to understand his point of view, and you're demonstrating respect for his point of view in that moment, which opens the door for him to do likewise in return. And then you can come back around and just restate your point of view, showing that you're trying to come to a place of agreement or even compromise. And sometimes we just need to agree to disagree, but it's all in a very good-willed manner that's showing respect for both sides. And writing down those communications in advance might be helpful, just to give yourself some preparation. And also taking notes while he's talking might even be helpful, just to show you really care. So let me bring this plane in for a landing. Assertiveness, obviously in the workplace, is very key to enabling you to speak up for yourself in a way that's respectful and appropriate. And it means being confident in communicating what you're bringing. Because listen, your skills are good. Your contributions matter, they're important. You are adding value to your workplace, and you can communicate those goals and communicate your desires and your needs without being pushy or disrespectful or even bossy. Assertive people are just simply asking for the respect they deserve, while also being empathetic about the needs and desires of those around them. So I'm going to ask for your input right now. I'm going to ask you, if you would please type in what you see as one benefit you could see for yourself to become, let's just say, less passive or less passive aggressive and more assertive in your work environment. Just as you think about your current situations and challenges, what would you say would be helpful to you? Mayanne, is anybody willing to share anything that they might see as a benefit?
Let's see. Some of the answers coming in is more confidence, enjoying your job more, listen more, being more patient, less stress, more rewarding to do work with coworkers, better relationships, allow expectations to be more clear and cause me less stress. Seems like less stress seems to be a resounding part of a lot of the answers.
Yes.
Active listening and asking more questions, being able to spend time on things that really matter.
Right. Wow, what a great group we have online today, you guys. I so appreciate what you're thinking through on this, and I just absolutely wanted to just underscore and highlight some of these responses that, yes, stress, the stress levels go down, interestingly enough. I mean, you might feel a little more stress when you're confronting the situation through assertiveness. I mean, because I get nervous even when I know I need to speak up, because if you're like me and you're conflict avoidant, it's hard because I just want harmony. But what I'm going to tell you is, in the long run, or even in the short run, anxiety goes down and there is less stress, because your communication is really helping resolve problems and those struggles we have in our relationships with our coworkers. So they do improve, and literally it creates a much healthier work environment for everybody. And and I think also what you're going to find, and I think some of you are hinting at this too, is just you're going to feel better about yourself. I mean, clearly the benefit is just your confidence goes up, which thereby so does your self-esteem and that self-concept. And something I don't want you to miss is, if you are at all in a management position, I'm going to tell you the team performance goes up with positive lines of communication amongst team members. Because when we can feel honest, that we can be open with our feedback and that it can be done in a way that is respectful to each member on the team, everybody feels safe. And when you feel safe, we just are going to do better. We're going to take more risks. We're going to throw out ideas more openly and more frequently, which just, everybody wins. This is a win-win situation. So as we wrap up our discussion today, let me just give you some final tips that I hope that you will consider, maybe just trying one or two of these. But the very first one I want to encourage you to do is just set your intention that every day you're going to work on improving your self-confidence, even if it's just a little baby step. And there's lots of ways to do this, but as I said before, just start paying attention to your self-talk. How are you thinking, and jot down things. Just notice, what are you saying to yourself? Just become more aware and encourage yourself to start speaking more positively to yourself. Learn more about you. Take time to think through what your goals are and why you're deserving to accomplish the goals you have, because you are. And, just being more direct in your communication. The more you can just be intentional with these things, that you're going to advocate for yourself. And this isn't selfish, by the way. Yeah, you're going to feel better and you're going to have a better experience. But what I want you to recognize is that it's also enabling you to perform to your fullest potential, and everybody gets to experience you. I mean, you're unique. There is nobody else on this planet just like you. And so what you're bringing to your little corner of the world is needed. So I want you to set that intention every day. Just take baby steps. Number two, understand that only you can control your behavior. And not only that, you can only control your behavior. We can't control the actions of other people. So as much as being assertive, we hope that others will be kind and respectful in response. It doesn't always happen, so there's no guarantees. So I just want to be clear about that. But as long as you remain respectful and empathetic to others, there's really absolutely nothing wrong with advocating for your own rights and needs in your workplace. Finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, I've got a few more. Practice being assertive. As I said before, this is a skill. It's not unlike when you learned how to drive a car. I know it's awkward at first, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience with it, but with practice, with role playing, it's going to feel more natural. And while you're role playing, practice some of those other skills like active listening and getting feedback on your body language. Just let that other person give you that feedback, how you're coming across and how you can tweak some of your language or how you're communicating. And really, the more you can practice that breathing in those situations, those things are going to kick in automatically when you're actually in that workplace scenario. So the more you can practice the typical kinds of scenarios, the more when they show up, the more that confident you will show up. Give yourself credit when you do. And I always think it's important to celebrate our baby steps. Too often we say, well, that was no big deal. And it's like, you know what? Every little step you take in being a more confident you is something to give yourself a pat on the back for. And I really invite you to take every opportunity you can to give yourself credit. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to feel and the more natural you'll become. And remind yourself that you matter. Your ideas, your contributions, everything you do when you walk into your workplace every day, you are impacting the atmosphere right around you. And so bring your whole self in, whatever you do. Bring your best self with you. And you're going to be heard and people are going to notice you. And they're going to be thankful to have you in the work environment. In fact, you want people to be so happy when you walk in the room as opposed to happy when you walk out of the room. Okay, you hear what I'm saying? Bring your best self. And as you practice these things, you're going to not only improve your assertiveness skills, but you're going to feel more satisfied with your work life and your personal life. So here's my last question for you. what's your next best step to develop a more confident, assertive you? And if you'd like to just type in what you feel your next best step is, or any questions you might have, please feel free to do that. We're going to spend just a few moments here answering any questions or just hearing what your next best step, because you will help somebody else maybe think through that idea as you type in your response. Again, my name is Dr. Rochelle Hoekstra Anderson. It's really been a pleasure to help you, help myself even, to become a more assertive, confident person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rochelle. Some of the answers to the question you just asked, a lot of people are saying it's practice, practice, practice. Practice taking a stand and speaking up. So those are some of the answers that are coming in right now. For anyone, we'll give you guys a minute just to type in any questions that you may have for Dr. Rochelle. But just a quick reminder to everyone out there that's joining us today, New Horizons is both here, we're here to offer courses and provide both knowledge and to prepare you for any certification that you have along the lines. We are a partner with SHRM. We have courses that are currently scheduled on our website that do tie closely to mastering positive assertiveness and emotional intelligence along all those topic lines. So please visit our website, newhorizons.com, and do a quick search to see if any of these courses are being offered near you. If you're also interested in the material that was presented in this webinar, or to join another webinar that we have, and we have quite a few lined up for the next couple months, please check out our webinar schedule also on our website, and register and see what else we have out there for you. We are here to provide you with some tips and tricks and knowledge that will help you throughout your professional development. And lastly, a friendly reminder that this webinar session is being recorded, so we'll be sending out the recording link for you to review or to pass on to any colleagues that may have missed the session. So getting into questions here, the first one is, could we distinguish aggressive and assertive behavior? I know you went over it a little bit, but just a quick reminder on how we can distinguish between the two, Dr. Rochelle.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great question. And I think, that's the reason why a lot of us aren't assertive, because we feel like it is being aggressive. So I would say the main distinction to help you figure this out is really what's the approach you're using. Are you showing respect for the other person? An aggressive style is really all you're concerned with is what you feel and what you want. And if you don't really care about the other person, you're going to say and do anything to get your point across. And so the aggression it can be very blaming. It's, you never do this, or you always do that, or I can't believe what a jerk you are. It's using very strong language. It can, even if it's not real strong language, it's shutting down, it's fault finding, it's blaming, it's pointing fingers. So I would say that's more the aggressive style. Remember, assertiveness is taking into account the other person's feelings and needs as much as you're taking into account your own, and you're using language that would clearly indicate mutual respect. Does that help?
I think so. The next question is, what if George continues to be a jerk after you talk to him? He likes to put people down because that's how he validates himself. What is the next step for Carol? Do we escalate to George's manager? What do you think is the next best step?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. And those are hard scenarios to always know what's the best way to go this. So of course, this is assuming Carol, and as I was progressing through the scenario, she's already talked to George, and George is still being disrespectful. So I would want to take a closer look at, is this behavior demonstrated in other places in the work environment? Is it around, in other places? Is it bullying? So we'd want to take a look at how extreme this behavior is. If it's If it's just specifically in those situations, I guess I might go to my supervisor and just say, listen, I'm having some struggles. I've talked to George about this, and really it's not impacting him, but it is impacting my ability to work well. Now, again, this is presuming you've tried the assertive approach, but I would definitely have a conversation with manager or supervisor. And if it is a more extensive problem, sometimes it even has to go to HR. So again, each scenario is a little different, but I would not just let it go. I would want to, especially if it's interfering your ability to do your best work, it does need to go to management.
Great. Another one is, any other tips on to not respond aggressively when triggered?
Oh, so to how to respond in a situation where you're feeling triggered to be aggressive in response is what I'm understanding that question to be. Yeah, I think, and again, we can encounter these things at home or in the work environment, but I think the key thing is if you cannot control your response in that moment, is you can just simply say, I'm not in the best place to talk about this right now. So I would like to table this conversation and have some time to just reflect and calm down. And how about we come back and finish this conversation, and then you can say 30 minutes or later today, but you're gonna want to give yourself an opportunity. If you cannot control your response in that situation, is excuse yourself. It's okay we don't always have to do things immediately. And I think sometimes if we can slow the situation down, it's going to allow our rational brain to be able to come back into play, because usually what's happening is the emotional brain is flooding our responses, and we're not able to think things through and find the best solution when our brains are being hijacked by our emotions. So I would say excuse yourself, but plan to come back, because there's nothing worse than saying, well, I'm not going to talk anymore, and you walk out, and the person sitting there is feeling frustrated because you just left everything hanging. So you want to always say, let's talk about this when when we're both in a place that we can do this rationally.
Great. Another question that's actually very interesting that came in is, have you ever heard of experiences of people that have had negative results of being more assertive toward either their supervisors or their coworkers?
Well, that's a great question, and my personal experience would be yes, and that does happen, and that's why I want to say that ideally assertive responses are going to create the same in return, but some supervisors may feel a little insecure or feel a little threatened by that, as might a coworker. And so we have to kind of read the situation, and that's why one of the slides says that it is situation specific. So I guess we have to sometimes be sensitive to the scenario in which we're being assertive. And I know that's a really fuzzy response to the question, or the question behind the question, because you simply asked if I've ever had that experience. And the answer is yes. And in some work settings, it's so intimidating that assertiveness responses are not rewarded. And so that's unfortunate. And so that's just a whole new conversation.
Right, great. Another good question that came in is, what if you are in a position where nothing you say or do will matter? Can a department just be toxic? If so, should someone look to find a new job, or how can you mediate that type of situation, knowing that you're in a losing situation?
Yeah, those toxic situations is what I'm hearing. And when we find ourselves in toxic relationships where your best efforts continue to be downplayed or discounted or ignored or even punished, I certainly would say, first of all, get support, and talk to an outside neutral party, whether it be somebody who cares but isn't emotionally charged with you. So, going home to your spouse and talking about this, of course, they're going to hopefully be on your side. But you may want to get some professional input, to really examine all sides of the scenario that you're encountering. But I'm going to just say there are times, and it's not my first go-to response for the clients that I work with to say, oh, just get out of there. I would like to help people develop their skills first of all before they say, I'm done with this place, take this job and shove it. Because that sometimes is kind of our trigger response when we're just sick to death of it, especially if it keeps happening. But I would always say, let's see what are always your options for looking for solutions that can, because one person literally can have a positive impact on a work environment. So it's just a matter of, again, there's so many details. These are such particular situations I would want to really help examine with that person to look for solutions.
Great. I know we're heading up to the top of the hour, but one more question. Would you consider defensiveness to be aggressive?
Well, we can be passively defensive, can't we? That defensiveness can also, that type of defensiveness where maybe we roll our eyes, we sigh. What else can we do? Just stonewall. Those, I would say, fall in that passive aggressive category. So yeah, definitely. So those defensive responses can be either the aggression, like, the blaming, finger pointing, or hollering, or name calling, those kinds of things, verbal abuse, but even just sometimes not saying anything, and, it's like slamming the doors, or stomping around. Those are on the passive aggressive angle.
That's a really good answer. We're at the top of the hour, everyone. I know we had tons of questions coming in for Dr. Rochelle. It was such a great session. But please, thank you. Join us again for another session. I really appreciate it. You'll receive the recording of this entire session. And please, thank you again, Dr. Rochelle. Thank you to everyone for joining us. This concludes our webinar. You may now log off. Thank you.